There's been a lot of chatter out here online regarding the administration of the Gambino family the past couple of weeks. Is the 83-year-old Louie Vallario the acting concierge of the Gambino family, as one prominent journalist is touting this week? We'll talk about that, and there's stories out there about this. And we also have a couple other interesting mob stories I'm following and want to discuss with you. Welcome to Real Mob Stories. This is your host, James Proctor. Please do me a favor and hit the like button and consider subscribing to Real Mob Stories with James Proctor. And without further delay, on to our feature presentation. As you know, I don't really deal with current guys unless it's something that's already out there by a legitimate media source or it involves court records. I spoke about how I don't believe that John Gotti is back in the Gambino family in any sort of role due to his age and also from being on lifetime parole. And then we were also told that Nicky Carrazzo, who's 84 years old and a former acting boss of the Gambino family in the late 90s and early 2000s, was also coming back as an acting concierge. Well, we just had an article from Jerry Capisi this week, and he's stating that Louie Vallario is the new acting concierge. So I want to share what we know about Louie Vallario, as he's really had an unlikely rise. And I just think his background and story is actually pretty interesting. So, I think that's where I want to start with this. And then I'll give you my thoughts. Is he really the, acting concierge? So Louie Vallario, lifelong Brooklyn guy. He was born in 1942 in Brooklyn. He started out as a Gambino associate. He was in Toddo Aurello's crew and of the Gambino family, obviously. So that's where he knew, most of the guys like, Sammy Gravano and all those guys that were in Sammy's crew later on. And so this was during the 70s. You know, what we can tell about Valario, as kind of in his early days, he wasn't looked at really serious initially. He's more of a glorified gopher and coffee guy, but everyone that I've spoken with or and that's been written about him is that he's considered very loyal. And so it wasn't until John Gotti became boss in 85, December 85, that Valario finally got straightened out. So Toddo Aurello retired, after the regime change, and then Sammy Gravano took over Toddo's crew as a Capo regime. Valario was close to many of the guys on there, like Frank Fapiano, Eddie Garofalo, Huck Carbonaro, Joey D'Angelo. And though in 1987, when Gravano gets promoted to concierge, he really made a surprising move to many people and made Valario the captain of his old crew. So basically, the crew that Toddo Aurello had, that Gravano took over, now belonged to Louie Vallario. And then they're talking about how this really created an internal problem with the Gambino family, and specifically between Sammy Gravano and Louie Milito. We're told that Louie Milito was upset about this promotion. He felt that he should have been made the capo instead of Louie Vallario, and supposedly Milito was talking bad about Valario, saying he was just not really a gangster. He's more of just a coffee boy, that type of stuff, and was supposedly saying bad stuff about Gravano. I don't know how accurate that story is, because where we get that information is from Gravano himself in the in the book that he wrote, Underboss. Because what we know is that Gravano and Milito, their relationship had been damaged for several years. We found out recently that a lot of the cracks started when Alan Kaiser was killed in 1976, and then we know that there were there were other issues, through the years. And, I think one of the last straws was what happened with the studio that Gravano had, the nightclub, that the Plaza Suites. And, basically they take out the guy that, the foreign guy that ran it, that was trying to buy it from Sammy. They took the guy out in an off the record hit. Paul Castellano was really upset. My understanding, it was like 2 weeks before, Gravano, um, you know, went in and talked to Castellano about it. There were some thinking that Gravano, would have to take the fall on that. And anyway, it really upset, Milito. So, and this was like 81. And so this was 5 years or so, before, you know, Gravano even got promoted to the Capo regime. So, but what we're told is that after this promotion, that, Milito was bad mouthing Gravano and Valario, and that was the reason that Gravano went to John Gotti to have Milito clipped. And Milito was close to Paul Castellano and Tommy Bellotti, and I think that's the real reason that Sammy was upset. Sammy was trying to blame that on DeChico, Frank DeChico, saying that Frank DeChico was considered Milito not loyal. But Milito was in prison at the time that Paul Castellano was clipped. He wasn't around during any of the planning stages of that regime change in December of 85. So you kind of have to question some of what we've been told. And also got to remember, at the time of the relationship, talking about when, you see, Louie Milito was doing business supposedly with Tommy Bellotti. And also, he had a company, Combat Louie Milito had this company, Jim Steel, and he was benefiting from the, construction contracts and relationships that both Bellotti and Paul Castellano had. But Louie Milito was a soldier just like Sammy at the time. And so, we have to realize that Sammy didn't have rank over Louie Milito when Louie was dealing with, Paul Castellano and Tony Bellotti. And, if Paul Castellano was the boss and Tony Bellotti at that time was a captain, if they wanted you to come in, then you had to do that. So, yeah, I don't think Sammy really had the right to be upset with Louie Milito. So let's go back to Valario. So he takes over, this crew that belonged to Sammy. Sammy, by this time, was concierge. Then he becomes underboss, later. And Sammy was mostly involved in more of the labor racketeering, construction contracts, that type of thing. And so Valario's crew, they did a lot of loan sharking, illegal gambling, bookmaking, and then later on, some of the labor, racketeering. And so what we know is that in 1991, dozens of the members of the family were indicted. They were sent to prison on RICO charges. We also had the issue with, Gravano flipping. We had where John Gotti gets arrested along with, Frank Licasio and Gravano, and they're in prison for, I don't know, about 10, 11 months. And then, Gravano flips. Gotti and Frankie Lope get sentenced to life in prison in 1992. And this was about the time that Valario gets charged with racketeering. And we're told a couple of things during this time period with Louie Vallario that was kind of interesting. One is that Gravano has said repeatedly that when he became a government witness, he refused to testify against Louie Vallario or any of his crew members or former crew members. And that's not true. You really can't do that. The government tells you when you become a cooperating witness that you have to disclose everything, all crimes that you've been part of. And what the situation is that there's nothing going to be written that's going to say, hey, you don't have to testify against Louie Vallario or anybody in your crew. That wouldn't happen. But there could be a gentleman's agreement that we would not have you go, testify against these guys, or we're not, as FBI, going to push to charge these guys with certain crimes. But part of it was that his crew members, that the people like Valario, he was not considered a violent guy, and so the thing was he wasn't really on the radar as any sort of huge target for the FBI. The FBI was looking for more people like John Gotti, obviously, the administration, the Capo regimes that had been around for a while, and the ones that they knew was involved in major, racketeering efforts, are made, violent type crimes. Eventually we know that Valario gets pinched, but what ends up happening is that he Gravano does build a relationship with these guys at the FBI, and they will work with you, kind of, I would say, more of a gentleman's agreement is what it is. So they'll, but if these guys really committed, major crimes, huge crimes, they would have definitely had Gravano testify against them. And so what we also know is Gravano's time as a witness was pretty limited. It was probably 5 years that he was involved in testifying, and so it was just more of a technicality that Gravano didn't testify against Valario, but he did not refuse to testify against Valario. It never came up. So one of the things about Valario, a lot of people might not know this. I know I kind of had correspondence with Mikey Scars last year, and one of the things that Mikey told me was that when Gravano was in, MCC awaiting trial, and this was before Gravano flipped, that Valario would come visit Gravano, and I think him, maybe it was Joey D'Angelo's kid. I can't remember who the same one was, but there was like two guys, but one in that we know for sure was Louie Vallario. And when Gravano flipped, that really, it angered a lot of the family, and it really had some of the members of the administration question Louis's I guess, loyalty to the Gambino family and the current administration, since had spent time visiting Gravano when Gravano was in prison before he flipped. So there's no evidence at all that Valario knew anything of that Gravano was going to flip. There was nothing like that. It's just that, I guess, the family just was devastated, upset about Gravano flipping. And, I think they just, for whatever reason, wanted to look at that as a negative for Louie. And, he had became close with Mikey Scars. And, so there were people that went to, Junior Gotti, went to the ruling, the panel and all that, and said, hey, Valario's not dirty. He did nothing wrong. And so, it went away, but, it was just something interesting to me that during that time in like 90, 91, or I'm sorry, 91, 92, that there were some concerns about Louie Vallario. And his relationship with Mikey Scars was beneficial. Valario started to become more of a prominent figure in the construction industry. He started having more influence within those labor unions. This was a lot of that work that Gravano had previously, and so in 1996 they actually promoted Louie Vallario to the Gambino ruling panel. And so he was actually in there with Mikey Scars, Jackie Knows D'Amico, and Peter Gotti. And so John Gotti wanted this panel set up to help his son Junior as acting boss. So Valario was in this committee till about 2002, and actually around that time he got indicted again on a corruption charge, and he got probation on that. Valario pleaded guilty to the charge and just got probation. Okay. So then in 2002, this was a more serious charge. This was the most serious charge that Valario had. He gets indicted for murder, extortion, loan sharking, bribery, illegal gambling. And this was regarding the Fred Weiss murder. It was interesting. I was looking at a lot of these newspapers at the time, and they're trying to say that they were actually saying Valario actually pulled the trigger, did that. He had nothing to do with it like that. It was just that initially that that Mikey Scars and uh, Valario and them, they were responsible for doing the hit, and they couldn't get it done. They tried. I think they even used Joe Watts. And then they end up shipping it to the Cavalcante family. The Cavalcante family was successful with that. So it was actually Anthony Capo and Vinny Ocean Palermo who pulled the trigger, and it was really Valario and Mikey Scars that was more of conspirators in that. I mean, they obviously would get that charge because they were involved in the conspiracy of the murder, but it was really Anthony Capo and Vinny Ocean Palermo of the Cavalcante Jersey family who pulled the trigger. And finally, what we have with Valario's, he pleads guilty. I think in April 2004, he pleads guilty, and he spends 9 years in prison. Valario hasn't been in prison since getting out in 2013. So this has been now going on 12 years. He gets out. He was 71, I believe 71 years old. And now he's 83. And now you have the story from Capisi stating that Valario is the acting consigliere. Yeah, I think it makes more sense than having Nicky Carrazzo back in. Yeah, I have no idea if this is true about Valario, but what I can say is that I do place the source of Jerry Capisi is credible. I mean, Capisi does a pretty good job with this stuff, but even he's wrong from time to time. So, I'm not sure if he's really the acting consigliere, and really it doesn't matter too much. But I think what we're seeing is what this is telling me with the Gambino family is that they're getting older. They're looking for I think things have dried up a lot with the different I would say the rackets out there. It's a lot more difficult. I think someone like Valario that has this long history, he's spent time, he's been around, since the 70s. He has a lot of knowledge about Cosa Nostra, and I think he would be a good conduit. He would be someone that I think would be respected by both the Sicilian faction, which is in control, and the non-Sicilians. And he's a Brooklyn guy. That's part of it. Like with Gene Gotti, I just don't believe that the Queens guys would be back in. I think that you're going back and um, I don't know, you're past all this. The family had tried so long to really get past the Gotti era. I just don't see them going back to someone like Gene Gotti. But with Louie Vallario, hey, I think it's possible. So let me know what you think about that. Do you think that Jerry Capisi was correct in his story? Do you feel that what do you think about the Gambino family using these guys, if it's true, that's in their 80s to be in the administration of the family? What does that tell you? Does it tell you that there's not more qualified people? Does it tell you that the other people out there, they're either in jail or they're just not people that would be qualified for those roles? So what does this all mean, with the mob of today? I'm just curious. But I think that Louie Vallario, he's had a very interesting ride. From starting out as a coffee boy in the '70s to now potentially being the acting concierge, and he's already spent time and on the ruling panel. So that's another reason that it might be possible. So anyway, until next time, take care, stay safe, and God bless you always.